There we go. All yours.
Okay. Right. Okay. So yeah. So then the big challenge we all face is time, as we all know. So yeah, my background. So Durham. I've been at Durham for just about a year before you get the carriage clock. You know, that gold thing that they give you after like 25 years. So I'm a little bit scared about that because it makes me feel old. But I was a PhD student at Durham, and then I went to the States for a few years, and I came back and I was a researcher. I'm an astronomer, so the things I used to work on look like that. You have to climb up them. They're in places like Namibia and Hawaii and Africa. I used to have lovely travel, not so much in Scotland, sadly, but anyway. And my PhD was in simulation and AI, not generative AI, but I got interested in that, and then in about 2008, there was a thing called the financial downturn, which most of you'll remember, and my field got defunded in the UK. So I was literally on the redundancy list, and I was like, what do I do next? And a job came up doing education work, and I moved into that and sort of started to bring a lot of my knowledge about simulations to it. Did a lot of work on the virtualization of simulations, and then if you hang around long enough, they keep giving you other jobs, and then you realize that you don't have to publish in papers. You can publish in books. I like books. Books are so much better than papers. Papers make you, papers make you condense your thinking. Books you can hopefully not in a bad way ramble on. So I've got some books on creative thinking in physics, leading innovation in creativity in universities, and then one of the passions of mine is diversifying the student body. So yeah, and then these days I have a home in this building, and I'll talk about that towards the end. So I'm going to whistle through some of this stuff because I'm conscious of time. You all know this word scholarship, which actually means educational research, but we don't like to say it because lots of our institutions don't like to use the word research for some of the stuff we do, but actually it is a form of research. To be honest with you, research is a form of scholarship. And these things in the hierarchy of words often get mixed up in our universities. Boyer famously wrote in the early 90s about the kind of things academics do. One of them, the scholarship of discovery, is what most people call research. But this thing at the bottom, the scholarship of teaching, is the thing that we're talking about here. It's critical inquiry into improving the student learning experience. And these days, people are into it quite subtle because we like to include students. So the scholarship of teaching and learning. And yeah, that's the thing that I got interested in when I got into this career break. But I have to say, I wouldn't be here if I hadn't had a good mentor. No way. Because I was a quantitative physicist, a simulator, a coder. I didn't have a clue what people thought. Probably I was a bit of an introvert as well. And I had got a mentor just by luck who was a professor in the School of Education, Doug Newton, who was a physicist by background. So we had the natural language, and he told me there's a thing called qualitative research. Oh, and suddenly my world changed because I could actually talk to people about things they did and not just worry about trying to quantify everything. So the first thing he said is listen to your students. So I listened to the students, and we did about a dozen focus groups with students at the start, and then one or two every year. And basically, because we were both researchers, we kept listening and then coming up with a solution that was a research project for every issue that they raised. And so we came up with lots and lots of solutions. And then we because it came from quite a well-resourced area of science, there was lots of money at the time. Not so much anymore, sadly, but there was a lot of money at the time to resource projects. And so we would go out and we would get funding to do teaching and learning projects. And they got bigger in scope. They started out in the classroom, they moved to the program level, and then to the institution. I'll talk about them very briefly. And by the end of this period, I was working with about 8 to 10 students every summer, which sounds wonderful, but I had no holiday. So I don't recommend getting to that scale. But it was an absolute joy to work with students, many of whom went on to sort of digital learning, digital careers, off the back of working on projects they've done with me. And this is an engineering student who I worked with a few years ago, talking about that. So yeah, so classroom changes, just to briefly go through it. We had this issue a long time ago at Durham, and I think it's common in most universities in physics. The A-level physics experimentally isn't really very good. And we found that our students either came in with really good laboratory knowledge or really poor laboratory knowledge, and it came down to, did they go to a private school that had a massive lab? Or did they go to a school like the one I went to that made you boil a cup of ice to turn it into water? That's the kind of experiments we did. And so what we did was we looked around and we did some work back in the day with the Open University, and we developed our own set of kind of virtualizations of experiments, and then we span them out into lots of different disciplines. And here's a student talking about the work that we did, using these experiments over and over to reinforce the learning. We didn't use it to replace the lab, rather it was the thing you did before the lab to help you do the lab. And we published that in New Directions, which I'm going to plug there. So here's a picture. These look a bit old now, but I'll just give you a quick example. Here's a chemistry reaction going on, and you can zoom in and you can look at the kind of molecules. These things move on the video, and you can see the reaction. And then here's a really funky looking one from a physics experiment to do with electrons. But we moved these on to quite advanced ones now, like about Bell's inequalities and stuff like that. And then, so you do that job for a while, and then someone says, "Oh, you should become a program leader." Oh God, I don't want to do that, but okay, I'll do it. And the first thing you do when you're a program leader is you take the pain off everybody else. No one wants to teach the research skills module, so you do it because you try to be a nice boss. And so everyone hates the study skills module. The teachers hate it, the students hate it, and you end up teaching it. So I said, okay, well, we'll put it in the bin, and what we'll do instead is we'll do project-based learning. So we did project-based learning for a number of years, and it span out to the whole. These are foundation level students, I should say, and it span out to all the kind of degree routes in the university and foundation level. And the projects were basically like mini PhDs. You'd have a bit of a brief, and then you have weekly meetings, and the students would try and advance things as they went. And the key thing about these is they stretch students. Students rise to anybody who does experimental science will know this. You give them a brief, you let them go, you give them equipment, and they will just rise to the challenge. So here's an example of one. Here's a little self-driving car. So the brief was design a self-driving car. Here's a box of electronics. Figure it out. Literally that. And within a few, students who'd never coded before, within a few weeks, were designing cars that would drive themselves around the room and drive everybody crazy. And we'd get them to present posters and things at conferences. So here's Toshiko, one of the students, presenting to the physics department his work. And basically, the whole thing took off, and it became kind of a project-based learning is like that. It'll kind of drive forward. So that was a whole kind of set of things. And along the way, I got interested in a thing that's come up a lot this conference, which is transition in, through, and out of university. And in particular, the transition into university. I came from Cumbria in the Lake District, first in the family to go to university, went to Imperial College in London. That's a bit of a culture shock. And I had a massive kind of culture shock when I did that. And so I got interested in talking to foundation students about that. We did an online course with them, part synchronous, part asynchronous, to get them ready to come. And it was really successful, like 95% of students used it. So I said to the university, can we do that for everybody? So we did a four element course for all students. Part synchronous, part asynchronous. Started about 10 years ago now. Key outcomes from this, well, 85% of students use it. And there isn't much that 85% of students will do anymore. They certainly don't turn up at my lectures, that's for sure. But before they did the course, this is the kind of words they were using when we questionnaire them, sort of excited, nervous, all the things we were at that age. And then my favorite image is this one. What was it like after you'd done the course? At least at that moment in time, they felt prepared. So it was a big work at the time because it wasn't very common. And as I mentioned before, when you start to do a lot of work like this, and I've seen lots of evidence, lots of people doing things like this, you can get into what I call the researcher trap. Do more projects, do more projects, do more projects. That's what you're trained as a researcher. And I ended up doing kind of like 8-10 projects every year, and basically never ever sleeping. And I realized at that point, that's not a sustainable model for anybody's health, my health, my kind of future. And I thought, I've got to stop doing this. So what am I going to do? So I had to, because I'd been a researcher and then become a teacher, I had to kind of reinvent myself again, which is like Kylie Minogue, except I don't do the outfits. There's an image in your mind, isn't it? So I became what's called an academic developer. Most of you will know what that means. It's a person who tries to support others in developing their professional identity, I would say some of those people don't necessarily think they need to change their professional identity. There's a whole other set of stories in there, I can tell, but I won't. But lots of people work with academic developers. And I became sort of in that space and did lots of coaching and mentoring of people. Again, totally making it up as I went along, but anyway, seemed to work. And what I did in this space was, it was about 2014, and because I'd been kind of education focused, I knew that there was a kind of disparity among staff. At the time, there wasn't a route for promotion for education focused staff. There was just kind of dead ends. You were capped at a certain level, and that was it. And most universities were in that space. So I started to do what I could, trying to advocate for education focused staff, running events and conferences, advocating for scholarship of teaching and learning, and advocating for the development of an equitable track. Now, and also kind of pushing my own agendas in terms of developing an external profile. One of the big things that I did that long ago is set up a conference for all disciplines, for education focused academics, and anybody interested in education, called ESLTIST, Enhancing Student Learning Through Innovative Scholarship. Again, it was a really bad name, but it's still going, and it's in St Andrews in a couple of weeks. I'm not selling tickets anymore because we've closed registration, but if you see it next year, do keep an eye out for it. So then I had this mission that to kind of help develop a kind of equitable pathway. And so I started to look for people who I could work with. And I was kind of fairly junior, and I was trying to find advocates, and I ended up kind of talking to lots and lots of different people and getting them to advocate for me or for the idea. And even a few who were in more senior positions. And we developed a group and a vision, and we shared that with the university, and the university said, yeah, well, that's a good idea. Let's do something about it. I have to say, there's lots of externals help at that time. TEF had come along and so on and so forth. So it wasn't that there weren't external political pressures. And then, the question is, did it work? So yes, kind of, I guess, is always the answer. We, like everywhere, I think now, lots of people last night were telling me they were on a education and scholarship route or a education pathway. Now, I'm not saying I'm an advocate for pathways. I think there should be one pathway that we should all be on. But anyway, that's by the by. A solution is to have pathways. And at Durham, we have them, and we measure in this kind of way. We have these bands for people at different career stages. And we put lots of KPIs and things around each stage, and we make it very clear to people what they need to do. And we make everybody do it every 2 years. Because what we discovered from EDI was that female academics, from people from minority groups, people weren't putting themselves forward as much as white men. Not surprising, but we needed to get rid of that. So everyone hates it, right? But everyone has to do it. And that means that we get promotions. And so we now have about 22 professors on the education track, which is pretty significant for a university the size of Durham. And we have SOTL actually mentioned, so it's written into the criteria. But yeah, everyone hates having to fill the form, me included. But does it work completely? Of course, it doesn't work completely. There's still challenges in this space, and the challenges really are, I interview a lot of people about this, not just from Durham, from other places. First one is time. Time is the, is the thing that we don't have a lot of. Second is community. So things like this are critically important. If you don't have a community to talk to, people to share ideas with, this is the first one of these I've ever been to. I've just sat watching people kind of gathering around, talking about ideas with people from other places. Brilliant. It's really hard for people who don't have someone else like them or someone else who'll want to work on education. It doesn't have to be on the education track in a department. And so if you're one on your own, that can be quite hard. The other thing you find is people have identities. We all do, obviously, but these kind of identities that we cling on to. So I have colleagues who say, well, I'm a teacher, I don't need to do that. I also have colleagues who say, I'm a researcher, why would I waste my time doing that? And then I have people saying, well, I've got a PhD, and my PhD is in blood, and I don't need to do this. And so I always think, well, I know what my PhD is in. Did I know anything about this one? I didn't. No. it's not a magic, having a PhD is not a magic key to all world knowledge as far as I know. And then, other people take on substantive leadership roles, and then money. So, yeah, so how do you help people do this? So I've been really fortunate, I have to say, that alongside all this other stuff I'm telling you about, we were able to put in place things. So firstly, a space, a building. So this is the Centre for Teaching and Learning at Durham. If you're ever in Durham and you want a cup of tea, just drop me an email. I'm not recruiting, but this is where we work, and this is the department I lead. And it brought together a number of different bits of the university under one roof, and it included the thing that I've just stepped down from leading when I stepped into the head of department role, which is the education lab, and I just want to talk about that. So the education lab is really it's a centre focused on software. That's what it does. It's similar to a few that exist in the UK and many that exist in Canada, for example. It has research groups. So we meet with people from across the university around creative pedagogy, around leadership, around digital learning, around other things. We're developing a pathway to get a research methods degree. We've got collaborations and international collaborations. We run conferences. We do internal grants and awards. And this is something I'm very proud of, which is we did some work with the University of Utrecht looking at their model for developing scholarship of teaching and learning, because the first thing I had was someone said to me, you need to have a research question. I'm a physicist, we don't do that. But actually, you do. And you need to think through these kind of research methods and develop from talking to students. So now we have a whole course basically you can take for those getting started with the scholarship of teaching and learning. The other thing that's kind of interesting in this space is kind of giving out awards. So we give out awards for projects funding for innovative teaching projects, and they're all measured against the kind of research council areas, innovation, feasibility, etc., etc. And they all involve partnering with students. We do not fund something if it's just an academic who wants to do it. Really sorry. Instead, they all have an element of funding, and in fact, we use the model from Healy, which I don't know, it's quite old now, but most of you've probably seen it, where we're looking at collegiality in the partnership. You can't just tell people what to do; they have to be true co-collaborators. And so we do about 40 of these projects at any one time, but I'm not going to show you 40. I'll show you a couple. So this is a virtual field trip in geography. Here, the issue was two things. Firstly, a pandemic. And secondly, geography does remote field trips in the mountains of the Lake District. And it needed to have something that people could do before they went, and then a little bit more you could do for accessibility if you really couldn't get there. And so they developed an award, they developed a project for this, working with an external company, and they got an award for sustainable education a couple of years ago. More common, these are Microsoft HoloLenses, and this is a physics project where students in physics collaborated with students in computer science to develop virtualizations, a bit like the stuff I showed you before, but you hold a magnet in front of you now and you can see magnetic field lines coming out of it in the simulation and things like that. And you can do the same, you don't need a HoloLens, you can do the same with your phone. We just like HoloLenses because they're cool. And they've spun it out to do some partnership work with the NHS. So yeah, and then AI, obviously everybody's doing projects in AI, that's just inevitable. We've got a number they're about to report to the colloquium. If you want access to a course about how to explain to students how to use AI ethically, that's a QR code that might be helpful. We'll circulate these slides anyway so you can have a proper look. And then finally, another one that might be helpful is this one on inclusive learning community. So after the pandemic and then relatively recently, a lot of the issues are around students feeling belonging within a classroom, feeling belonging and wanting to be there. So I don't need a show of hands about how many people are struggling with student engagement. So we need to think of ways to deal with this. So we employed 20 students who from all the disciplines in the university to then focus group larger groups of students to pull back in the key findings and then turn that into a training resource about how you develop inclusive learning communities within your classroom. So being quick. Where do you want to go to? Where do you want to go next? I guess this is my question. What's the biggest roadblock? This is my story, but other people's stories are different. But this is probably the one thing that's true for all of us. We all spend our lives fighting fires. None of us spend our life, we've all got the thing we want to do, but we push down the road because there's the other things that we have to do. And what's interesting to me is this is a quote from Eisenhower from 1954. And this is a quote from somebody I interviewed recently. And they basically say the same thing. They say, actually, the one change is constant. And the one thing we need to recognize as institutions is change is constant. Actually, we need to have time for change built into our workloads, built into our models. And we're certainly looking at that now as a university, trying to do that a bit more. Because, we've had a pandemic, we've had generative AI, who knows what's next. And what I've learned not to do, very wisely, is not to say, what you should do is this, this, and this, because that always goes down like a really good thing. So instead, the thing I would say is that the key to expanding your sphere of influence is to do with context. So everyone's context, everyone's university, everyone's department is a different context. Even within my university, everyone's department is a different context. So all you can really do is look for the impact you make in your own context. And by impact, I don't mean ref impact. I mean, there's no more powerful impact than the impact you have on a student's learning. And actually trying to capture that data is the most powerful thing. And then using that within your context to expand what you do, if you have the time. And that's the critical thing, is collaborating with others to find that time. And so, again, lovely to see lots of collaborations here between different teachers. So, got to the end. Conclusions and takeaways. What I would say is, obvious, I don't need to say this to you all here. I'll start with you on something. What I would say is, given the title of this talk, Horizons, never be limited by your own horizon, by your own identity. I'm not I'm a physicist. I'll always be a physicist, but I don't think of myself first in that way. I don't know what I am anymore, but I've stopped caring. And I think that's not a bad thing. It's actually a very good thing. Key, most important thing you can have is a good mentor. Like fundamentally, if you haven't got a good mentor, find a good mentor, even if it means going and being, pulling a third party to ask them, just changes your life. Be an ally to anybody and everybody, and then seek advocates when you need to, and you need to develop something new. And then, of course, most importantly, partner with as many people as you can to try and drive some change. Thank you.